Hey folks, welcome back to Crows Before Bros. I'm Randy and I co-run this channel with my bestie Lauren so that we can just chat about books. And it's 2024! Woo! Another year of reading has come and gone, and as such it's time to talk about the books that I read. Which was frankly an easier task since I read way less than last year, which I'm honestly pretty proud of myself for. And if that's a confusing statement to you, you can check out my last video where I talk about the goals that I set for 2023 and why I set out to not read as much. So for my recap this year, I've chosen to go with a tier list. A note that the tiers don't necessarily line up with my star ratings. There might be something that I've given a 5-star that ends up in the kind of 4th category or wherever, mostly because when I sit on a book for a little bit, I tend to change my mind about it after time and how it stuck with me and how it's impacted me. And yeah, I figured tier ranking is just a great way to categorize based on the vibes, and the vibes alone, baby. Our categories are as follows. Tier 1 is my DNF / why did I do this to myself? This year was the first year I let myself DNF books, and I wanted to acknowledge the ones that I didn't finish but attempted. And it's tied to the books I just absolutely hated and really made myself stop and say, why did I do this? My personality was probably hating these books at some point in the year. Tier 2 is It Is What It Is. This is a lot of the books that disappointed me a lot and that I just have said, some books are gonna not be that good. It is what it is. Tier 3 is Barely Passing. These are books that I had some issues with, but maybe they had a cool concept or they had something redeeming about it that made it a solid mid-tier read. I have notes on what I would like to see different, but it's a passable book. Tier 4 is Tasty. These books are good books. They're books I would probably recommend to a friend and that gave me what I needed out of a book. And maybe it was just missing a little oomph, a little pizzazz, a little whoompa to bring us to a 5-star, but it was still a great read nonetheless. Tier 5 is No Notes.
No notes. No notes. No notes. No notes. It's perfect.
And I'll admit, I'm a fraud. I've never seen New Girl, but Lauren quotes it at me enough that I know the context now. These are books that were perfection, that I wouldn't change a thing about, that I would say are 5 stars, that I would recommend. I just loved these books. And so without further ado, let's look at what I read this year. Starting with Tier 1, the DNF / why did I do this to myself tier. So I'm gonna start with rapid firing the books I didn't finish this year, and within this subcategory, I have 2 more subcategories. So I have books I didn't finish because I just wasn't vibing with them and might come back to, and I have books I never ever intend to pick up ever again in my life. So for books I'd like to try again, we have Finley Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jane Allen, and Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. All 3 of these books I was enjoying, but you know when you're like not disliking a book, but you're just like, I don't want to read it right now? All 3 of those books fell into that category, so I will pick them up again in the future. For books I probably won't try again because I genuinely was not enjoying them, and that's why I stopped reading, we have The Accidental Pinup by Danielle Jackson. This book fell super flat and I immediately hated the love interest. Next we have Zodiac Academy: The Awakening by Suzanne Valenti and Caroline Peckham. This was terrible. It is poor writing, and it's the kind of series where everyone was like, oh, but you really just have to make it to book 7 to enjoy it. And I was like, I don't want to read 6 more of these. Next is Yumi by Sifton Tracy Antipari. Simply couldn't grasp what was going on here. It has a beautiful cover, and I don't know if it was me or the writing, but I have no idea what was happening in that book. Next is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. Immediately no. Again, just no. The writing was not for me. The main character is so insufferable. Big pass. Safest Houses by Eric Walters. I actually had no huge fundamental issues with, but I was reading it as a potential novel study for my kids at work and decided partway through that they wouldn't like it, so I just stopped reading it, and I probably won't read it again. Finally, 3 Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake. This book was intriguing, but it was so slow paced, and when I found out that the second book started where I thought this book should get to by like the 30% mark, I was like, nah. These next few books are books that I tragically did finish, and I hated with my whole being. The rage of 1,000 burning suns consumed me around the time of these books. For all 4 of these books, there's a video on this channel, so I'm gonna keep it quick. First, Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Why? I'm just not a Coho girly. I have too many issues with her books. It's a no from me. Next is The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. It's true nonsense, the characters are not good, and the ending is jail. Hey guys, editing Randy here. I must have had Hunger Games on the mind because I say Suzanne Collins a ton here. That's a lie. Alice Sebold. Alice Sebold. The Lovely Bones by Suzanne Collins. Aside from learning recently that Alice Sebold kind of sucks a lot as a human person, she also sucks a lot as a human writer and wrote such a boring, such a nonsense, and a moderately unethical book. And finally, From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zabata. I could go on and on about how book talk burned me with this one. Every character in this book is the worst person on earth and should be alone. It's what they deserve. Our next tier is It Is What It Is. A moderate step up from the past tier, but still not good enough for me to really enjoy the book. Here we find books that are largely forgettable or that disappointed me so deeply. Starting off with The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. I super love The Flat Chair, and I think the concept of The No-Show is interesting, but it's simply not what I wanted. I just thought it was poor execution of it. Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. I wanted to love this book so much. It is a sapphic, witchy retelling of The Great Gatsby. What we ended up getting was kind of that in vibe, but a really poor attempt at a plot that couldn't be covered by the vibes. Good Girl Complex by Elle Kennedy. The Deal was a big surprise for me last year. I ended up really enjoying it, so I thought that I was an Elle Kennedy girly. Turns out I'm just a The Deal girly. Good Girl Complex has the trope of like a naive rich kid, and I think maybe that's just not the trope for me because I find it really annoying. The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This book felt like the author was like, you know what's really in right now? Morally great characters. And what I mean by that is just mean, bad characters. The appeal of Morally Gray is that this person is making questionable decisions, but there's something redeemable about them that makes you love them, and I didn't really find that in this book at all. I felt like there was no stakes, the world building left a lot to be desired, I had a lot of questions about some plot holes. This is one that a lot of my friends really loved, but it simply wasn't for me. Thousandth Floor by Catherine McGee. I think this one is one that I went into with more dystopian sci-fi expectations and walked out with a bunch of like high school gossip drama. It started off strong, it took a nosedive pretty quick. This one was kind of strange where I was not actively enjoying it. I was aware that I didn't really like the book, but at no point did I think to stop. I just kept trucking on through because I was like invested just enough in the drama that I wanted to see it through. The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is the biggest whiff on this list, guys. The Folk of the Air is one of my favorite series that I've read in ages. I love it. I think it has such lush world building and characterization, and it kept me on the edge of my seat, and it has such a fast plot, but I think The Stolen Heir tried to take all those things and shove it into The Stolen Heir, and it just came across as a little messy, a little try hard, maybe. I wouldn't call it a bad book necessarily, but I just didn't enjoy it. I probably won't read the rest of this series. Local Gone Missing by Fiona Barton. This book maybe just had too many points of views and ended up getting really muddied. After I finished it, I realized I had rated another Fiona Barton book pretty low also, and so I think this is probably the last chance I've given this author. The Writing Retreat by Julia Barton. It's essentially 9 Perfect Strangers by Leanne Moriarty, but they're writers this time. 0% of this thriller thrilled me or kept me on my toes. I feel like I saw it was coming a mile away, which is rare for me. The Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake. A classic example of the struggle that many trilogies have, where the middle book lives in the space between keeping the momentum from the first one while bringing us to whatever the conclusion is going to be. And what happens is you either get the best book in the series, like Hunger Games, or I think Folk of the Air, the middle is the best, or you end up with a trilogy like this, where the middle book is just exposition, lots of characters sitting around, they have big feelings. Blake kept up her gorgeous, tasty writing here, but didn't really take me anywhere. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. This book is probably great, and a lot of people probably benefit from it a lot. I maybe just wanted something that went a little deeper, went a little further. It felt a little base level to me, and that's probably just because of the work I do. So this isn't actually anything against the book, it just is fully on me this time. Love, Hate, and Clickbait by Liz Bowery. The main character, Tom, is so insufferable and mean. He never grows. He doesn't deserve his golden retriever boyfriend Clay. There's minimal character building, and the story felt disjointed. Like I was looking at snapshots of a story instead of like a whole progression. The next one is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Don't hate me! Everyone loves this book, and I simply was so bored, guys. Her writing is great, but boring. This whole book is just a group of anxious friends sitting around being anxious. And if I want a book like this, I'm gonna read If We Were Villains. Last book is The Trouble with Hating You by Sajani Patel. It's a standard rom-com book that probably would have made it into the next tier if not for the ending. Why do rom-com books tend to have these absolutely out of left field, bonkers endings that make no sense? Our next tier is passes, but barely. These are solid mid-tier books that I would make some adjustments to or have some complaints about, but have enough of a foundation that I probably enjoyed aspects of it. They Never Learned by Lane Fargo is a really cool concept that just left me wanting a little more in the realm of thriller and character growth. I think this book is probably the perfect thriller for somebody who isn't me. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I'm sorry, Lauren. I know you love this book so much. It was just a little too slow paced for me, a little too much of nothing. It was very cozy, it had great vibes, I love the main character. The Hookup Plan by Farah Roshan. This is a pretty mid-tier rom-com. It's exactly what you'd expect with no insane endings. It was good, I don't remember a lot of it, didn't rock my world. In the Lives of Puppet by TJ Klune is another huge disappointment for me, and maybe I just don't like Pinocchio. There's some truly cozy, lovable characters and settings throughout this book, but not enough to carry me through the messy plot. The Boy with a Bookstore by Sarah Ekavari Smith. Again, a pretty predictable mid-tier romance. Forced proximities, lovers to enemies to lovers. A lot of the drama was actually pretty dumb, but in the way that you expect from a rom-com. It's not trying to be more than it is, and I can appreciate that. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch was such a cool concept, especially in the midst of all these other media things exploring the multiverse. But aside from our main character, who's pretty well fleshed out, all the other characters are pretty nothing. The book left me with more questions than it maybe meant to. There were some kind of plot holes that I was like, maybe we should address that. Episode 13 by Craig DeLuey is one of those books, again, that is a super cool concept with maybe not the best execution. So the author is writing about this group of people exploring a haunted house, and it has some moments that would be genuinely pretty scary, except that the author has chosen to write this whole book in assorted media. So you have transcriptions of scenes, and you have, you know, emails sent and all these things, and none of it is ever a first or third person view of what's actually happening, which made me feel quite detached from the story and took away that level of scariness from it. The Nanny by Lana Ferguson. I honestly do not remember a lot of this book, but I do remember that it was hot, and so here it is, smack dab in the middle of my tier list. House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland is all vibes, and that's okay sometimes. I just didn't like the circular plot that they attempted to put in here. It does have some really stunning, haunting, beautiful imagery though. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. Cute concept that suffers an array of identity crises. I wanted to like this book a lot more than I did. The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. This book is simply so bizarre. I've been done it for over a month now, and I still haven't really worked out how I feel about it. I can't say I entirely know what was happening, but I think I enjoyed it. A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. I really enjoyed the rest of the series, and so I was really disappointed by this finale. I thought the characters kind of lost who they were by the end, and part of me wonders if I would have liked this book more if I would have read it back to back with the other two. And last in this category is An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. Almost super cool. I really enjoyed the world that was built and the main character, but I wish there was more seeing the actual tournament that's going on. I feel like this book is a lot of people talking about this tournament, and so I think it maybe could have used another round of edits, but other than that, it was pretty enjoyable. Our penultimate tier is Tasty. These are books that were super good, that I'd recommend, that I enjoyed, that just maybe are missing a little oomph in there to bring me to a 5-star. Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. This one stuck with me throughout the year, and I'm very excited to be reading Dark Forest right now. It is so flowery and poetic for a sci-fi and leaves you with this feeling of smallness in the universe. Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. It's fast-paced, it has beautiful imagery throughout, it has lots of great action throughout it. It's based in Chinese myth, but it's written in such a way that it doesn't require you to have prerequisite knowledge. It was a beautiful book and I really enjoyed it. Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. I know in my brain these are not the best written books of our time, but I know in my heart that I love them. They have their problems a lot, honestly, but they're so good, I don't care. I love Jax, he's a great character. I love the fairy tale gone wrong vibe. Don't understand why there's vampires, I don't care. They are tasty books. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy is haunting and left me with like a pit in my stomach throughout it, and really made me question how, as a society, do we treat child stars and fame in general. Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker is exactly what I like in a kind of self-help book. It is written by somebody who is an expert in the field and does research. It has genuine, attainable tips, and it was really just interesting to learn about. I really enjoyed this one. Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I really love these characters and the world. Even though it's huge and chunky, I'd probably read it again. Not Here to Be Liked by Michelle Quach is a charming little academic rivals to lovers with a focus on exploring feminism as like a young teenage girl, and I thought it did a pretty good job at it. Happy Place by Emily Henry. Can you believe that I am not putting an Emily Henry book in my top tier? It is still a top tier rom-com, do not get me wrong, but maybe it ended up here because I just want even more from Emily Henry, like a greedy little goblin. That being said, the shower scene, that's a yes for me. Next is Sex Talks by Vanessa Marin. I really enjoy reading books about our relationship with sex as people. I think maybe it comes from growing up in like Christian youth groups and there being strange mentality around sex. Sex Talks explores how to have conversations about sex in a world that teaches us not to talk about it. And I found it accessible and informative. Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. I was surprised that this romance was more heavily focused on grief than the main character's obsession with true crime, which is what I assumed it would be about. This had more heart than I expected. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. A classic I'd never read before, and it was so dang cute and I had a lot of fun with it. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I cried reading this. It's not a perfect book, but it is full of so much heart. A beautiful collection of stories about a cafe that allows its patrons to travel through time in very specific parameters. Some of the stories in here are honestly so heart-wrenching and just gorgeous. Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. I love William Shakespeare because I am exactly like other girls. I think it's great fun. Much Ado About Nothing is essentially a Seinfeld episode. The Disaster Artist by Mark Sestero. I love a bad movie, and so I have watched The Room probably a half a dozen times and naturally fallen into the Wikipedia spiral of who is Tommy Wiseau and how did this movie even come to exist. And I think The Disaster Artist is a great way of exploring both the good and the bad of what happened in making this film. Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. I really enjoyed the Good Girls trilogy, and I love that this book felt a little heavier and more grown up. It's not quite at the same level as the other two in the series, but I still really enjoyed it. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Moi? I don't know how to say this last name. Sci-fi takes a lot out of me. It is so like whoop over my head, and this was no exception, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless. Gideon is so tongue-in-cheek and so sassy and snarky. I loved this book. I didn't know what was happening, but I do know I was invested, and that the parts where I could grasp what was going on had me at the edge of my seat. Vengeful by V.E. Schwab is the second book in the Villains duology. Vengeful carries Schwab's distinct writing style and concludes the duo beautifully. I think it was perhaps a bit slower than Vicious, but that was okay, and it was still a great read. Yellowface by R.F. Kuang is such a fascinating look at the publishing industry and how they handle authors who are BIPOC or authors who are otherwise marginalized, how marketing feeds into it, and it's a satirical look at how somebody might try to game that and how it might impact their lives. It made me really step back and explore, why do I read what I read? How does marketing impact what I'm picking up? Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. The premise here is, what if the Ku Klux Klan were actual, genuine, legitimate monsters? A crossover between fantasy and historical fiction that is short, and yet in those short pages has a lot of moments that have you on the edge of your seat and have you almost ready to cry and have you laughing out loud. It was a wild ride. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. Another book exploring common mindset people have around sex and how to combat some of those lies and myths. I know that this one is pretty cis-normative, so it might not work for everybody. A Kiss of the Siren Song by E.A. Trofmankov. A note that I've only read the beta read for this book. I haven't read the final one that's out in the world yet, so it's very possible it would jump up into my 5 stars. I just can't say I had no notes. I literally had notes. I was a beta reader. A really super cool sapphic pirate ex-siren romance where our leading women are trying to stop a pirate from attaining the most powerful weapon in the seas. Super fun read, and I really can't wait to read the finalized version that came out late last year. The Art Thief by Michael Finkel is a truly fascinating, true story about a man who is the most prolific art thief in history, who simply had the audacity to walk into museums and take things whenever he wanted. And when you think of art thieves, you think of these big heists and these crazy scenarios and black market, but this guy would literally just like walk in, he'd be like, whoop, like hide a painting under his shirt, peace out, and then just like keep it in his room for the aesthetic. It was a wild story. I really had a lot of fun reading it. The Strange Library by Haruki Murakami. I've had Murakami's books on my list for quite a while now, and finally picked up this short story in audio form while on a road trip with my husband, and we spent the next number of days discussing, what does this book mean? How is the character's grief impacting the story? It was really quite interesting for such a short little book. A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers is a book where I loved the characters and found bits of myself in both of the main characters. It explores a lot of big topics in really gentle ways. I super loved Mosscap and his fresh eyes for all the beautiful things of the world. Here we are at our final tier, our no notes tiers. These are books that are 5 stars, perfection. I recommend them, they're great. Starting off with The Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. Perfection. No notes, literally. This was the first book I read this year and I was blown away. I was like, this is gonna be the best reading year of my life. This is how you close out a trilogy. I laughed, I cried, I contemplated buying the new soft covers even though I have the collector's edition hardcovers. I love Holland Forever and I bow down to you, Victoria, our literary hero. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo is a surprise to nobody. It was a reread. It's the namesake of this channel. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, the better secret history in my opinion. I could feel the tension between the characters right away, and I literally screamed at the last 5 words in this book. If You Could See the Sun by Anne Liang. This one was a surprise to me. It's a YA magical realism about a girl who can suddenly turn invisible, who enlists the help of her academic rival to essentially create a business where she's spying on her classmates for cash. This book was sweet, powerful, charming, lighthearted, funny, and it's never too heavy-handed in its messaging. A top of the year for sure. All of Us Villains and All of Our Demise by Amanda Foody and C.L. Herman. While the first book takes a little bit to get going, once it was going, I was hooked. I devoured these books. They have such My Tears Ricochet by Taylor Swift energy, and I love it. I love a magical competition to the death. I loved these characters and the emotional torment that they're gone through in this process. I would pick up this duology again in a heartbeat. Icebreaker by Hannah Grace was maybe my biggest surprise of this year. After loathing From Lukov with Love, I was maybe hesitant to pick up another like ice skater romance. What I found in Icebreaker was one, super hot, and two, a surprisingly real, healthy relationship that felt like it was between two actual people who made actual human decisions, which is so rare in a rom-com. Usually in contemporary romance, you kind of have to suspend a level of belief and you have to say, okay, these red flags are fine because it's fiction, but our main character simply is not having any of the red flags, and I loved her for it. Also, the Uber scene, wow. There's one single note on this one, and it's the epilogue, and it's just what you expect from an epilogue. I think most romance books could do without one. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I'm exactly like other girls. It's of course a 5-star for me. It was a reread. I just love weeping about these two boys in love, okay? Let me live. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. The first book in this series is so light and fun and really sets up the premise in a great way. And by the end of the book, you've seen these characters grow so much, and it is so heavy and hard by the end. And I think Holly Jackson did a good job of not taking all the trauma that Pip has gone through super lightly. I really enjoyed the series. The ending had me like screaming and like kicking my feet. Everyone go read this trilogy. Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare might have been bumped up a little bit on this list because I saw it live this year in a super cool venue. It's essentially She's the Man. It's super funny. The version I saw had lots of like live music interspersed into it, and so then when I was reading it, I had maybe some other thoughts imposed on my reading, and that was okay because it was a great experience, and these plays are meant to be experienced. Iron Widow by Jiren J. Shao. Holy moly, this book is so dang cool. A truly impressive YA, sci-fi, dystopian, fantasy novel that explores gender roles and colonialism, doesn't shy away from those hard or complex topics. I loved our main characters, and I loved the fast pace and the action throughout. Vicious by V.E. Schwab. As per usual, V.E. Schwab really gripped me with her writing style and characters in this short little duology about two boys who are desperate to become superheroes and the lengths they'll go to attain that through any means necessary, up until the means were quite damaging, and then it forms a rivalry between these two characters, a cat and mouse game with truly morally complex characters that I adored. The Love Wager by Lynn Painter. This book was so dang cute. Didn't try too hard to be anything that it wasn't. And as a result, it was a top romance of the year for me. The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by S.A. Chakraborty. If people ask me what my top book of the year is, this is probably what I'll answer. This book had such a cool, diverse cast of super lovable characters. Our main character, Amina, is a retired pirate who is now living life as a mother and is struggling to find her identity without the seas, only to be convinced to return to a life of piracy to rescue a kidnapped girl from an enemy far bigger than any she had ever fought in her previous pirate life. The side characters are lovable, the action is brilliant, it has some of the funniest quotes I've read, it's so tongue-in-cheek. I simply adore this book. I cannot wait for the sequel. And that's it. Those are all my books for the year. Having done this tier rank, I'm realizing that my reading was pretty balanced this year. I have a little bit of everything. As we go into the next year, I'm carrying over a lot of goals from last year that I talked about in my last video, to not have a set number of books, to let myself DNF, to explore books with different topics and from a variety of different authors. I also would like to read a classic this year. I'm thinking maybe like Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. And I'd also like to pick up at least one high fantasy this year. What was your favorite book this year? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to add it to my TBR. I'm trying to build what I'd like to tackle this year, and definitely have some space for some ones that really excite me. So give me your recommendations. And that's it for me. If you've been along this Crow's journey with us over the past year or month or day, know that we love you and we're so excited to spend another year doing this, and we'll see you next time. Bye!